On July 26, 2009, a red 2003 Ford Windstar minivan was seen speeding down the Taconic State Parkway, driving straight ahead into oncoming traffic. It resulted in a head-on collision involving 3 different vehicles and caused the deaths of 8 people, including 5 children. The investigation that would follow uncovered the bizarre details that lead up to the crash and would lead some people to still be seeking answers to this very day. Diane Schuler was a married mother of 2. Her 2 children were her 2-year-old daughter Erin and her 5-year-old son Brian. She was married to her husband Danny, who worked nights as a security guard for the Nassau Police Department. Danny and Diane had been together for 13 years and had been married 6 to 7 years at the time of the accident. Diane was 36 years old. She was born in the year 1973 in Floral Park, New York, and grew up there. She was the 4th child out of 5 and the only daughter to Warren Hance Sr. and Eileen McCow. Her mother Eileen left the family when Diane was just 9 years old, and she never saw her mother again. Her mom met another man and abandoned her former family. All of Diane's brothers later formed somewhat of a relationship with their mother, but Diane never did and always held a grudge against her mother for abandoning the family when Diane was at such a young age. This led Diane to become the woman of the house despite her young age, as she was the only female in a house with all males. Diane took to that role. Everyone who knew Diane would describe her as a supermom. Not only did she do most of the work around the house and handle her 2 children, but she also worked as the director of credit, billing, and collections at Cablevision, bringing home more than $100,000 per year. She was involved with the PTA at school, and other parents said that she was always the first mom to get her kids to school, and that her kids were always dressed impeccably with no stains on their clothes, and their hair always done perfectly. Also, she would chaperone school trips as well. Her husband Danny was sometimes described as her 3rd kid and was known to be lazy, and he relied heavily upon Diane, who was the leader of the family as well as the breadwinner. What began as just an ordinary camping trip with the family in the state of New York would tragically end in a gruesome car crash, taking the lives of Diane, her daughter Erin, her 3 nieces Emma, Allison, and Kate, as well as father and son Michael, age 81, and Guy Bastardi, age 47, as well as a friend of the Bastardi family, Daniel Longo. Diane's 5-year-old son Brian was the only survivor. The autopsy showed that Diane had a large amount of alcohol and THC in her system. THC is the active ingredient in marijuana. The toxicology report stated that her blood alcohol level was 0.19, which was more than double the legal limit in the state of New York. They said she had the equivalent of 10 shots of alcohol in her system, as well as a heavy amount of THC, recorded at 113 nanograms per milliliter, that indicated she had ingested the THC within 15 minutes to an hour prior to her death. Was it just a simple case of a woman who was trying to do more than she could handle and finally had a breakdown? Or is there more to this story than meets the eye? Did Diane Schuler knowingly go on a drug binge while driving 5 kids home from a family camping trip? Or is there something more to this story that we aren't seeing? One thing that I have learned in my time researching true crime cases is that when none of the theories make sense, there is a possibility that the truth is something so bizarre that nobody can imagine it. Or maybe the answers are just what it looks like, and some people are having a hard time accepting it. Occam's razor states that the explanation with the fewest assumptions is usually correct. So, is the case simply that she was a high-functioning alcoholic and nobody knew it, or could it be that the truth is still out there undiscovered? In this video we will take a look at the Diane Schuler case, and I will discuss the theories as to what could have possibly happened. I have a theory that I have not seen explored yet, and we will get into that later. I will start by explaining the details of the case for the people who are not familiar with it, or to refresh the memory of people who are. The last weekend of the month of July in 2009, the Schuler family decided to take a camping trip a few hours away from their home to the Hunter Lake Campground in Parksville, New York, along with Diane's 3 nieces. One discrepancy I see everywhere is that the trip should have taken 35 minutes. This misconception was likely started by the Schuler family attorney Dominic Barbara at the press conference. He stated she was not an alcoholic. She rarely had a drink. She got in the van with the children, and what should have been a 35-minute drive took almost 4 hours. Everywhere I research information about this case, it seems to go along with that estimated time of arrival of 35 minutes, or sometimes you will hear 45 minutes, which makes it seem very odd that Diane was driving around for almost 4 hours. However, if you GPS the campground to her home on Long Island, The trip is about 143 miles, estimated to take about 2.5 hours. We will get more into that later. The plan was for Danny to head up to the Hunter Lake campground on Thursday in his Toyota Tundra with the luggage and the family dog. Diane would arrive driving her brother's 2003 red Ford Windstar minivan with her 2 children, as well as her 3 nieces the following day. They planned to leave early on Sunday morning. Along with her 2 children were the daughters of her brother Warren Hance. The Hunter Lake Campgrounds in Parksville, New York, which is in the Catskill Mountains, was a very familiar place to the Schuler family. They made the approximately 140-mile trip there regularly, and were regulars at the campground they loved. Danny would keep his camping trailer and boat at the campgrounds when they weren't there. Let's go over the timeline. Danny arrived at the campground in his gray Toyota Tundra with the family dog on Thursday. Diane arrived the next day on Friday with the 5 children. Her 2-year-old daughter Erin and 5-year-old son Brian, as well as her 3 nieces Emma age 8, Allison age 7, and Kate age 5. According to Danny on Friday, he had a couple of beers and Diane had a couple strawberry daiquiris. On Saturday, they took the kids to an amusement water park nearby. He said they hung out at the campground Saturday night, and neither he nor Diane drank. The family thoroughly enjoyed the routine camping trip weekend, and were looking forward to coming back in the future. Once Sunday came, it was time to pack up and make the 140-mile trip back to their home in West Babylon, New York, which is on Long Island. There are some discrepancies regarding the exact times that everybody woke up, but according to Danny, he woke up at 6 a.m. He cleaned his boat and got the camper packed. He said Diane woke up around 7 a.m., along with the children, and they finished getting packed and were ready to leave at 9:30 a.m. The car setup remained the same for the way home, with Danny and the family dog driving the pickup truck and Diane and the 5 children in her brother's red minivan. At 9:56 a.m. Diane stopped at a McDonald's in Liberty, New York. Security footage from the McDonald's shows the children eating and playing in the play place. The cashier was interviewed and said that Diane seemed perfectly normal and that she ordered a large orange juice and an iced coffee. Note that Diane ordered for herself 2 drinks and no food. More on that later. At 10:33 they leave the McDonald's. At 10:46 Diane stops for gas at a Sunoco gas station, which was 1 minute away from the McDonald's. So it took her 13 minutes to leave McDonald's and arrive at a gas station 1 minute away, which is probably not out of the ordinary when dealing with 5 small children, having to get them all in the car and buckled up, and I believe 1 or 2 of them were in car seats. Upon arrival to the gas station at 10:46 a.m., Diane goes inside and asks the clerk if they have a particular brand of gel cap pain pills. The clerk said they didn't have them, which is all on surveillance camera with no audio. Diane then left the gas station. There is a video of her leaving the gas station parking lot where it looks as if she pulls out into the street and has to stop short, almost causing a collision between herself and an oncoming car. According to some people who knew her, she was normally an aggressive driver who would honk a lot. At 10:58, they leave the gas station and head south on Route 17. At 11:37, Diane's niece Emma calls her dad Warren Hance, who was at work in Floral Park. They have a 47-second conversation where she tells her dad that they might be a little late. Warren speaks to Diane, and she tells him there's nothing to worry about. Sometime between 11:30 a.m. to noon, reports start coming in of a red minivan seen driving aggressively on Route 17 in Orange County. At 11:45, a report comes in from a witness who reported seeing a woman who resembled Diane, who was dressed in a black long-sleeve shirt and short pants, bent over on her hands and knees, as if she was vomiting on Route 7, just outside Middleton. Traffic had slowed down due to only 1 lane being open in the area. The same witness later reported seeing a red minivan tailgating them and flashing the headlights in the Chester area. They moved over to the right lane to let the minivan pass by, and the witnesses verbally confirmed that it was the same vehicle and woman they saw on the side of the road vomiting. They further reported that Diane then drove past them and zigzagged through traffic aggressively. Seeing as the witness had driven past her seemingly vomiting on the side of the road, this means that Diane had to be driving fast to catch back up to the witness and pass by her. Later they confirmed the woman to be Diane Schuler after seeing a photo. At 12:08 p.m., Warren's wife Jackie Hance calls Diane and speaks to her for 2 minutes. She said that nothing seemed wrong, and Diane tells Jackie that they're running late. At 12:13 p.m., the van goes through Harriman Toll Plaza. From 12:15 to 12:45, witnesses report seeing a red minivan full of children, driven by a dark-haired woman weaving aggressively through traffic, straddling lanes and blowing the horn, driving on southbound thruway from Harriman to Sloatsburg. Another witness reported seeing Diane sitting on the guardrail, appearing to vomit. Francis Bagley reported that the van re-entered the highway and immediately began tailgating him so bad he couldn't even see her headlights. Then she tried to pass him on the shoulder of the road, but was unable to. Next, the van blew on the horn, while following behind him for an entire mile. The witness then pulled over to let her pass by as both of them drove into the parking lot of a McDonald's, as well as a rest stop and Ramapo service area. Francis observed the minivan drive into the truck driver's parking area, before driving over the curb into the grassy area and back into the parking lot designated for cars, and then she got out and was bent over, possibly vomiting. One witness claimed none of the children were wearing seatbelts. According to the police report, one witness said all the children were wearing seatbelts, and another witness confirmed that at least 2 of the children were in car seats, resulting in conflicting reports. Francis said that if he could do it all over again, he wishes he would have confronted her, and if he had seen the children in the car, he would have realized something was very wrong and took preventative actions. Another witness, by the name of Gerald Salerno, Esquire, reported he was driving in the center lane during his encounter with Diane's red minivan, which came up from behind him in the right lane, and she moved to the center lane and then back to the right lane. Gerald said it appeared Diane was grasping onto the steering wheel, appearing to concentrate. Finally, he saw her swerve back into the center lane, cutting off another vehicle, which had to swerve out of the lane to avoid hitting her. He said her movements were very precise, and she was not swerving recklessly, as if she was out of control. At 12:55 p.m., there was a 17-second call from Diane's phone to a wrong number. At 12:58 p.m., Diane calls her sister-in-law Jackie Hance. Jackie says that Diane seemed out of it, and the call dropped after 2.5 minutes. At 1 p.m., Warren Hance arrived home just as the call was ending between Diane and his wife Jackie. Warren called Diane back and spoke to her for 8 minutes as she was going over the Tappan Zee Bridge and through a toll. Warren reported that Diane sounded disoriented. His oldest daughter Emma got on the phone, and Warren asked his daughter what she sees. She tells him she sees signs for Terrytown and Sleepy Hollow. She then utters the infamous words regarding the case, "There's something wrong with Aunt Diane." She tells her father that her Aunt Diane is having trouble seeing and her head hurts. Then Diane got back on the phone and Warren tells her not to move and to wait where she is, and he will come out and meet them. Diane tells Warren that everything is fine, and the kids are happy, and there's nothing to worry about. She mistakenly referred to Warren as Danny, her husband's name. At 1:10 p.m., someone in the minivan using Diane's phone dialed 3 wrong numbers in 1 minute. The phone was then left neatly on a concrete barrier in a pull-off area just beyond the tolls. Warren keeps calling the phone, which keeps going to voicemail. About a dozen calls over the next 20 minutes continue going to voicemail as the phone sits on the concrete barrier. When the phone was found later, it was dead, and it's unknown as to whether it was turned off or if the battery had died. Warren then heads to pick up his father, Warren Hance Sr., who lived nearby, so there would be someone to drive both vehicles, and headed for the location he presumed Diane and the children were at. At this point, the Hances were freaking out to a point where they called their friend, Brad Katinas, who reported the situation to the police. Sometime shortly after 1:30 p.m., Diane makes a right turn from Pleasantville Road onto the exit ramp for Taconic State Parkway, driving the wrong way onto the parkway. She enters the parkway and drives south 1.7 miles into northbound traffic, forcing more than a dozen other cars to swerve out of the way. She just keeps driving straight forward, not attempting to swerve or get out of the way of oncoming cars. Multiple 911 calls start coming in. Witnesses later reported she was almost in a trance-like state and looked almost serene. Witnesses Elaine and Peter Royal were driving down the exit ramp that Diane used to enter the parkway and had to swerve onto the grass to avoid colliding with Diane, and said that her eyes didn't even move as she stared straight forward. Another witness reported that he saw the red minivan pass a spot where she could make a U-turn, and Diane had numerous opportunities to turn off the road but chose not to. Lots of other drivers were honking and flashing their lights trying to get her attention, but she just kept going as if nothing was wrong. Witness Peter Grotto said that he had to swerve over a couple lanes of traffic to avoid the minivan, which he said was going dead pin straight. Lorna Ramos Morel said it was like playing chicken. She said she thought it was someone who was dead set on ending their life. At 1:35 p.m., the red minivan smashes head-on into a 2004 Chevy Trailblazer carrying 3 Yonkers men headed to a family party, killing everyone in the Trailblazer and everyone in the minivan except for Diane's son, Brian. The minivan goes off the road and into the grass. The Trailblazer then crashes into a 2003 Chevy Tracker containing 2 occupants who only had minor injuries, and the second collision was not serious. The minivan catches on fire. Witnesses ran to the minivan to help and were able to pull Brian out before the vehicle burst into flames. Brian, who was just 5 years old, later said that his mommy's head hurt and she was unable to see, and then he flew like Superman. At 1:37, state police were called to the scene. 911 received half a dozen calls regarding the accident. 2 witnesses that went to help reported that they noticed Diane was dead immediately. They pulled out the 4 girls, but none of them had a pulse. They didn't see Brian at first because he was curled up under the seat. They said nobody was wearing seatbelts, and they also said that Brian was crying with his eyes tightly shut. Former chief of the Hawthorne Fire Department, Joseph LaGrippo, looked for signs of life from the victims. He noticed Brian, who was hurt badly, but he was crying, which he took as a good sign. He put Brian into the first ambulance that arrived. Witnesses say that the minivan engulfed in flames in the front. They couldn't get the doors open. They had to break the windows. Finally, they were able to get the door open, and Diane's body fell out on top of their legs. They had to step over her to begin taking the children out of the burning vehicle. Some of the witnesses put up sheets around the accident to prevent others from taking pictures of the scene. The crash resulted in a serious head injury for Brian, as well as 3 broken bones. This caused Brian to suffer from oculomotor nerve palsy, which causes one of his eyes to move in the socket, causing double vision. This resulted in him having to do daily exercises to correct it. 7-year-old Allison Hance was taken to the hospital by ambulance, but died en route, meaning she likely showed signs of life and was possibly still alive after the crash. 5 days later, an autopsy was performed by Dr. Alexander Milovanovic. Diane's cause of death was found to be blunt force injuries of the body with multiple skeletal fractures, lacerations, and contusions of internal organs. His findings reported that Diane's blood alcohol level was 0.19, which is double the legal limit, which is 0.08. 0.3 is the range where you would black out, although a blackout could happen with as little as 0.15 blood alcohol level, which is less than Diane had in her system. There was also a high level of THC found in her system. The doctor reported that she had consumed THC as early as 1 hour to 15 minutes before the crash. There was no evidence found of a medical event or a stroke. There was also an extra drink worth of alcohol found in her stomach that hadn't been digested yet. Some people were speculating that it was a stroke or a seizure. When the toxicology report came out, the public was outraged. Diane's family couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe she would drink and do marijuana, especially while driving the kids. The Hance family refused to talk to the police in the days following the crash. Investigators arrived at the Hance's residence wanting to provide them with information. They were met at the door by an off-duty NYPD detective named Anthony DiCarlo. They asked to speak to the Hances. DiCarlo told them Warren had left for the hospital to visit Brian. They asked if they could speak with Jackie, and DiCarlo said that she didn't want to answer any questions. They said they didn't have any questions to ask her and just wanted to provide her with information. DiCarlo spoke with Jackie and then came back and said she didn't want to see them. So that concludes the major events in the timeline. The most obvious question to ask: was she an alcoholic? Her family claims that she never drank, though those claims have fluctuated a bit. Her friends claim that she would drink a little bit, but never got drunk. She was described by everyone as a leader and a great mom, and she was an executive at her work. The New York Post reported that there was a bar near where Diane worked, and that she would often stop there, and her drink of choice was screwdrivers. Which is interesting considering there was a handle of vodka found in the minivan, and she got a large orange juice at McDonald's with her coffee. Other patrons at the bar reported that she would often go there to drink screwdrivers and complain about her marriage. Diane and Danny worked different shifts, so they didn't get to see a lot of each other during the week, which was causing problems in their marriage. Diane also had issues with Danny's laziness. Diane had problems with pain from a tooth for years, but she hated going to the dentist. It's possible she could have had an abscessed tooth that could have been causing her a lot of pain. This could explain why she was asking for pain medication at the gas station. She was looking for a specific brand of pain medication. Later, the Schuler's private investigator reported that the clerk told him she was looking for either Advil or Tylenol gel caps. So when they didn't have them, she left. It's possible that in the past she had found that was the only type of medication that alleviated whatever pain she was having, and when they didn't have it, she decided to try something else. The reports of her reckless driving started coming after she left that gas station, so that seems to be when she began drinking was after leaving the gas station. Also, it would be hard to believe she was able to ingest so much marijuana in the situation that she was in. Some people speculate maybe she could have consumed edible THC. The family hired private investigator Tom Ruskin to retest all the samples taken from Diane to confirm it was her DNA, and to corroborate there was no mix-ups in the tests. Things ended up going downhill with Tom Ruskin and the Schuler family. The family claimed that Ruskin wanted $10,000 at first, and then he wanted $20,000, and then it became $30,000. Then once he was paid, he just took all their money and did nothing. However, he did run all the tests he was supposed to run, so it's possible these claims are untrue. They also hired attorney Dominic Barbara, who claimed that he never received the tests from Ruskin. Ruskin claims that he did send the tests to Barbara. Daniel Schuler claimed that as soon as they paid Tom Ruskin, he disappeared. However, in the documentary about the case, Jay Schuler, Danny's sister-in-law, is seen calling Tom Ruskin, and he seems happy to explain the situation to her, so it's unclear what really happened regarding all of that. In the documentary, Tom Ruskin calls Jay back after she left a voicemail asking him to call her back. Tom says that he sent the results of the test to Dominic Barbara, but never heard back from him. He said he then called Danny and Jay, but never heard back from them either. Jay claims that she was told not to answer his phone call, which makes me think Tom is the one telling the truth, or maybe there was some kind of mix-up. Tom says that he retested the samples, and everything came back as they were supposed to, and everything had been correct. Tom says to Jay that we'll never know if Diane purposely did this, which left Jay feeling confused and frustrated. Tom Ruskin's firm also conducted an investigation, which included interviewing friends of Diane and family members, as well as canvassing the campground and the route she took for leads. Also, he obtained the video footage from the Sunoco gas station. According to Ruskin, all the money he had received from the Schulers were spent on these activities, as well as lab tests. Tom Ruskin asked for $25,000 to participate in the documentary, but they declined as that was way too much. He said anything less wasn't worth the trouble to get all the evidence out of the archives, as his employees' time is worth far more doing their regular jobs, making tens of thousands of dollars per day. Another theory is that she could have done it on purpose. Witnesses reported that she was driving straight as an arrow and looked almost serene, not attempting to swerve out of the way of all the oncoming cars. Some people speculate that Danny and Diane had a major fight the morning they were preparing to leave the campground. Some speculate maybe Danny was cheating or something like that. However, there is no evidence to corroborate any cheating allegations or any evidence there was a fight. Diane may have complained about her marriage from time to time, but there was nothing uncovered that would explain or indicate that she wanted to end her life. Both Danny and Jay deny the autopsy results and say that Diane was a great mom and none of it can be true. They have done a lot to attempt to change the publicity surrounding the case. They refuse to believe the evidence and believe that it was a medical problem that caused the crash. Danny later claimed that Diane would drink on rare occasions, and he said she would occasionally smoke marijuana, but it wasn't a regular thing. Jay said that after the kids were put to bed and the laundry was done, sometimes Diane would enjoy an occasional drink and sometimes she would smoke marijuana to help her sleep. At the initial press conference, Danny tells reporters that he can't explain where the bottle of vodka came from. Later he goes on the Larry King show and tells him that they kept a bottle of vodka in the camper. Larry asks him is it possible that she could have been an alcoholic, and he didn't know it all this time. Danny said it was not possible, and he's been with her for 13 years. Jay then says that she doesn't want the families of the other victims who died in the crash to believe that their loved ones were killed by a drunk driver. Daniel then says that Diane was the one who packed the bags that morning. Larry asked why she would have packed the vodka in the minivan instead of the camper. Daniel said that he was the one who mostly drank the vodka and sometimes would take it out of the camper during the week. At first, he was claiming that he had never seen his wife drunk ever, and neither had anybody that knew her. Eventually, he gradually began admitting that she did drink occasionally. Police checked all the liquor stores and bars in nearby areas along the route she took to find out if Diane had stopped there, but none of the people who worked at those places said they recognized her. In the documentary, Danny and Jay meet with Dr. Werner Spitz, who is famous for working on lots of high-profile cases, including the John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King assassinations and the Casey Anthony case. Dr. Spitz, like Tom Ruskin, concluded that all the tests had been done perfectly. Jay says that she doesn't want Diane to be the poster child for moms who drive drunk. She refuses to believe Dr. Spitz's analysis on the evidence and says as soon as the investigators saw alcohol in the toxicology report, their minds were made up. Danny brings up the possibility of Diane having an abscessed tooth. Dr. Spitz says it's possible in theory that an abscessed tooth could have caused Diane to have a stroke, but he didn't see any signs of a stroke in his analysis of the evidence. Dr. Spitz says that even if she did have an abscessed tooth, that doesn't explain the alcohol found in her system. Danny, getting a little desperate at this point, says maybe she was having a stroke and reached for a bottle of water and accidentally grabbed the bottle of vodka by mistake and just started chugging down vodka thinking she was drinking water. Danny doesn't state any theories for the THC, but I guess she then reached for her phone to call for help and accidentally grabbed her bag of weed, and then she accidentally rolled a fat-ass blunt and smoked it. Then Jay says they just can't accept any explanation where Diane knowingly took the bottle and started drinking. They're clearly in major denial here. Dr. Spitz says that if she had an abscessed tooth, she could have been in a lot of pain and took whatever was available to alleviate the pain. He further states, so you could say to yourself she had severe pain, and she had to alleviate that pain now. Not in an hour, but now. Trying desperately to give them some kind of closure and reasoning that they would be able to accept. Danny says, so then she drank enough to record a .19? Jay pipes in 45 minutes? Danny says, someone who drank once a month maybe? Dr. Spitz says, look, it really doesn't make sense my trying to convince you. You have to have your satisfaction. Your satisfaction is only going to be achieved if you send it to another lab to redo it. Jay then brings up exhuming the body, and then vents her frustration at people who say they are going to help them, and then don't do it. They go to a clip of Jay outside smoking, where she says she needs to smoke 1,000 cigarettes right now. Then while she was smoking, she says nobody in my family even knows I smoke, which is very ironic considering the situation of nobody in the family seemingly knowing Diane drank. Danny continues venting to the camera about his frustration. Jay begins venting that she is becoming very frustrated by Danny because he's off from work all day and doesn't spend any time with Brian, and he's very insensitive to Brian's grieving process, and he doesn't think that feeling sad or crying about the situation is going to do any good for him or Brian. She says Brian had an extremely bad meltdown a month ago about his mom, and the pediatrician told them they need to have Brian talk to a psychiatrist, so they ended up getting him an appointment with one. Jay here venting her frustration with Danny's apparent laziness and inability to connect with family members on an emotional level gives us a little insight into how Diane may have been feeling. Jay was new to experiencing this situation, whereas Diane had been living it for years and may have felt like she was trapped by it. There were lots of lawsuits filed against Warren Hantz since he was the owner of the minivan, including our very own Diane Schuler, suing Warren Hantz because Daniel's wife borrowed his van and got wasted and wrecked it, killing all his children. Danny also sued the state of New York for inadequate signs on the exit ramp Diane got on, which aside from the do not enter and wrong way signs, I'm not sure what other signs Danny expected there to be. The Bastardi family, who lost father and son Guy and Michael Bastardi, as well as family friend Daniel Longo, was also sued on the grounds that Guy was not in shape to be driving due to his age of 81, even though Guy had absolutely nothing to do with causing that accident and was purely a victim in this story. In the documentary, Jay can be seen on camera talking about Daniel. I'm not sure if she knows she was currently being recorded, because the camera is pointed kind of low, and it seemed as though she was talking candidly, and she speaks about a conversation she and Daniel had privately where Daniel said that he doesn't forgive Diane for all of this, and he was very angry because she left him as a single dad to raise Brian, and he never wanted kids in the first place. He said that she's supposed to be here to do all of this, which is an asshole thing to say, but I can understand him venting his anger coming from the situation in private. All the theories regarding this case really have a lot of holes. If she had some kind of medical problem and ended up having a stroke or a seizure or something like that, then why did she consume so much alcohol and THC? If she was trying to end her own life, why would she involve the lives of her children as well as her nieces? If she was trying to numb the pain from an abscessed tooth, why would she consume so much? She had been seen by witnesses vomiting on multiple occasions, and still had 1 drink's worth of alcohol in her system at the time of her death, which would indicate she continued drinking even after vomiting. Considering there are major holes in all the current theories regarding the case, I believe some out-of-the-box thinking is in order. In my experience, typically when you have a case and none of the theories make sense, a lot of the time the answer is something that nobody has thought of. When I was doing research on the case, I listened to the Strange Land podcast, which mentioned that Diane took Ambien, which is also known as zolpidem. I researched for any evidence of this and was unable to find anything until I was watching the documentary, There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane. At one point, Jay and Danny finally are able to obtain her medical records, and they're looking over the type of medicines she takes, and it clearly says Ambien 10 milligram. Now this is just a wild theory, and there's probably holes in it. However, there are holes in every theory regarding the case, so why not explore it? First off, I should explain a little about myself. I currently work as a peer support specialist at a crisis center, helping people who are addicted to drugs, as well as people experiencing severe mental problems. I became a peer support specialist because I am in recovery myself and used heroin for about 10 years, mostly during my 20s. In addition to heroin, I did a lot of other drugs, including Ambien. I was able to get my hands on a prescription for it and would get about 30 a month for several months. In my experience with drugs such as benzodiazepines and hypnotics like Ambien, sometimes when I would take a few of them, I would go into some kind of blackout autopilot mode and consume every drug I had in my possession, which caused me to have a massive overdose one time when I was 21. Also, I would inject the Ambien by crushing it up and preparing it the same way you would a shot of heroin. The next day when you wake up, you don't remember a thing after taking the drug. There were multiple times when I would inject 3 or so Ambien and then wake up the next day and the entire bottle would be completely empty, and on 2 occasions I broke my computers. The time I overdosed, I took 3 Klonopin and 3 methadone pills and went into this autopilot blackout mode and ended up taking all the Klonopin, methadone, and heroin I had in my possession, which happened to be quite a lot. That night I went to an event at a concert venue that doubled as a nightclub of sorts on certain nights. I took 3 Klonopin and 3 methadone. My next memory is waking up in the hospital with a tube down my throat 5 days later. From what I was told, I ended up meeting some other people that night at the club that happened to go to a local university, and they had access to the chemistry lab. So we went there, and I stole ether and chloroform from the lab, which I later found at my house when I got out of the hospital. Then I went to a gas station and got a beer, which is very out of the ordinary for me, as I've never been a drinker. Then I went to my friend's house and asked him if I could hang out there for a few minutes to sober up before I drove home. All of that story is just from what other people told me after I got out of the hospital. I have never remembered anything from that night after taking the methadone and Klonopin, but when I got out of the hospital, all my methadone, Klonopin, and heroin were gone. Now most people will tell you that there was no Ambien found in the toxicology report, and I have been through the police report and the autopsy report and haven't found any mention of Ambien. However, people also will say the toxicology report didn't find any over-the-counter medication in her system. So, I wonder, did they even test for over-the-counter medication or Ambien? It doesn't say that they were or weren't in her system. They just aren't mentioned at all. I am certainly no expert on toxicology reports or autopsies, so hopefully if there is anyone watching this video who happens to be, you can educate me on how a toxicology report is conducted. I wonder, is Ambien something that would normally be tested for? If they find extremely high amounts of THC and alcohol, would they continue doing more tests to see if there was Ambien or over-the-counter medication in her system? We do know that she asked for over-the-counter pain medication when she stopped at the Sunoco gas station, which would indicate that it was likely something that she took regularly if she was indeed in pain from a tooth problem. So, if there is no mention of whether they tested for over-the-counter pain medication, you could conclude that maybe it was not tested for, and you could also conclude, since there is no mention of Ambien, maybe that was not tested for either. I did a little research on this, and from what I understand, is that drugs like Ambien are typically detected using liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry techniques. Ambien exhibits significant post-mortem redistribution, which changes the concentration of the drug. The techniques used in her autopsy were gas chromatography flame ionization detection and gas chromatography mass spectrometry. All of this is a little beyond my comprehension, but from the sound of it, there are different ways to conduct toxicology tests, and the method used to detect drugs like Ambien was not used. Now it does say in the toxicology results that carbon monoxide was detected, which was the only thing detected using the technique, which is referred to as spectro. I am not sure if that would mean it was gas chromatography mass spectrometry, or liquid chromatography mass spectrometry, or a different technique, or if that would really even make a difference. I'm not a freaking chemist. So all I can definitively say is that I'm not sure if Ambien was tested for during the autopsy. Now again, this is just a theory, and I'm just speculating here. What if she was having trouble sleeping in the tent that night, and knew she had a long drive back home, and wanted to make sure she got to sleep, so she took an Ambien or two? Maybe she woke up around 4 or 5 a.m., and was thinking it was earlier in the night, and that she couldn't fall asleep, so she took a couple Ambien. Then she ended up going into this autopilot mode, where she consumed all the marijuana and alcohol she had in her possession. That could explain why so many witnesses reported that she was just staring straight ahead, and I quote, looking almost serene. Ambien or zolpidem is a widely used ultra-short-acting non-benzodiazepine in clinical practice. Compared with benzodiazepines, it doesn't have side effects such as a daytime hangover, rebound insomnia, or development of tolerance. Here is a report of an autopsy of a man who exhibited abnormal behavior induced by Ambien. There was a man in his 60s who had suffered from postherpetic neuralgia. About 2 months prior, he had been prescribed Ambien for his insomnia. According to his family, while under the influence, he performed several actions such as striking a wall, taking his futon outside, and eating 5 times a day. The man had no memory of any of this. His postherpetic neuralgia didn't improve, and he had to be hospitalized and was treated with an epidural block. While he was in the hospital, he took off his clothes, removed the epidural block catheter by himself, which is extremely uncomfortable, and he slept on other patients' beds. He disappeared from the hospital one day, and the next day he was found dead in a narrow water tank 10 kilometers away from the hospital. He was thought to have driven a car by himself to reach the location of the water tank. His forensic autopsy revealed that his cause of death was drowning. Ambien and several other drugs were detected by toxicological analysis of his blood. The concentration of these drugs was within therapeutic range. There are several other reports about somnambulism induced by Ambien, such as sleepwalking, sleep driving, and eating. Considering the strange episodes following the administration of Ambien, his behavior on the day of his death was considered abnormal behavior induced by Ambien. Could something like that have happened to Diane? Is it just a coincidence that she happened to be prescribed Ambien? I would still say the high-functioning alcoholic theory is probably one of the most likely theories to have happened, but it just has so many holes in it. If she was that bad of an alcoholic and pot smoker that she would do it while driving 5 kids in a van on a long car ride, and then continue doing it after vomiting multiple times, that would make her a very severe alcoholic. I really don't think somebody that's severely addicted to alcohol would be able to hide it effectively, especially while raising children and working a demanding job. She was a manager in Cablevision's accounting department. Likely there would have been alcohol hidden in her workspace, and she would have frequently smelled of alcohol, and she would have gotten the shakes if she went too long without any. I can see the family knowing that she was an alcoholic and pot smoker, and covering it up for fear of lawsuits and their family name being dragged through the mud. Diane Schuler was convicted of a DUI at some point himself. However, I find it unlikely that all her co-workers would also hide it after the fact. It's also strange that Diane would drive so aggressively if she was driving under the influence and in possession of marijuana. She could have very easily been seen by a police officer and been arrested, and the children would have had to been picked up by Daniel, and her secret would have been exposed to everyone, and it would have been devastating to her lifestyle. Why would she continue drinking even after vomiting multiple times, as evidenced by the drink's worth of alcohol found in her stomach in the autopsy? Could it be that this was normal for her, and her tolerance had gotten so high that she would vomit and just keep on drinking, trying to achieve her desired level of intoxication? Although if her tolerance was this high, it's unlikely it would cause her to vomit. Also, there was no signs of alcoholism found on her liver in the autopsy. If this is what happened, we can speculate that she began drinking sometime during leaving the McDonald's and leaving the Sunoco gas station. This is when she got the orange juice, and this is shortly before the reports of reckless driving began coming in. She ordered an iced coffee and an orange juice for herself. The people at the bar near where she worked who said she would go there said her drink of choice was screwdrivers. Why order both an iced coffee and an orange juice other than to mix the orange juice with the vodka? Orange juice is a popular choice of mixer for people who drink vodka. And why did she not order any food for herself? Perhaps she didn't want to lessen the effects of the alcohol by having food in her stomach. None of that explains how she was able to consume so much THC during her trip home. There are a few different ways she would have been able to consume the THC. A lot of people believe that she consumed edible THC such as baked into cookies or brownies or candy, which could be possible, though you would think they should find something in her stomach indicating that. The most common way of consuming THC is to smoke marijuana. She could use a bowl, a pipe, a bong, or smoke joints or blunts. Nobody reported an odor of marijuana floating around in the car after the crash, though it was a hectic moment. It's possible it just didn't register in the heat of the moment, or was overpowered by other smells involving the car being on fire. There was no bowl or bong found in the wreckage, so that leaves joints or blunts. Was she really driving down the road chain smoking blunts and chugging screwdrivers? Stopping periodically to throw up and then keep on at it, with 5 young children in the car? I just find it hard to believe. Probably the theory that I find most likely is that she did it on purpose, although that has a lot of holes too. Reasons for believing this theory is that she left her cell phone, quote, positioned neatly on the concrete barrier, just past the toll, where she had the phone conversation with her brother, who told her to stay put, and he would come meet her. Also, it explains why she would drive down the entrance ramp ignoring all the wrong way signs. It explains why she would drive straight down the parkway looking straight ahead, looking almost serene. There are some rare examples of mothers killing their children, though usually that involves religious reasons, and I haven't heard anything about Diane being super religious. Maybe she was drinking so much alcohol and consuming so much THC because she wanted to get herself into a state where she was able to go through with it. Though it is unlikely she would have been able to drive straight in an intoxicated state like that. She would have been swerving all over the place, if she was even able to drive at all, which witnesses say was not the case. The main theory that the family is going with, probably because it's the best-sounding theory for them and for Diane, is that she was in severe pain from an abscessed tooth. There is evidence that she had a 2-month-old abscessed tooth, and she did complain about having pain in her tooth to some people. Diane's best friend Christine reported that she had noticed Diane clutching her jaw the last time she saw her, and Danny said that Diane had been suffering from a toothache. She had a root canal for the tooth that was unfinished. It isn't a likely theory that this was the initial cause of the incidents leading up to the accident, but it is possible that if she did have an abscessed tooth, it could have caused her to have a fever, which could then cause her to suffer from delirium. Delirium can cause disorientation, difficulty in speaking like slurring words, rambling or nonsense speech such as referring to her brother by her husband's name during their last phone call, trouble understanding speech, difficulty reading or writing such as not being able to read road signs, and hallucinations. According to the autopsy report regarding Diane's teeth, it says, the teeth are natural with many teeth acutely missing in the multiply fractured lower jaw and missing in the right part of the upper jaw, which is fractured horizontally. There are several loose teeth on the tongue and the mouth, so it does not mention whether she had an abscessed tooth or not. The Schuler family has come up with all kinds of theories regarding this, mainly trying to push the theory that Diane's pain caused her to have a stroke while she was driving, which they have been told isn't possible, as there were no signs of a stroke during the autopsy. There was also the theory that Diane could have been diabetic due to having gestational diabetes, which means being diabetic during her mother's pregnancy. However, that typically goes away after birth with treatment. If she was diabetic, drinking small amounts of alcohol is alright, but drinking it in large quantities can lower the blood sugar, causing hypoglycemia, which can cause symptoms such as confusion, heart palpitations, shakiness, anxiety, nausea, vomiting, and unresponsiveness. There is no evidence found in the autopsy showing Diane had diabetes at the time of her death. There is also the theory that Diane could have suffered from a very rare condition called autobrewery syndrome, which is when the body converts carbohydrates into alcohol. This would not cause the significant amount of alcohol found in her system, nor would it be responsible for the THC or the bottle of vodka that mysteriously made its way from the camper to inside the van. There have even been claims so wild as Diane's blood was heated by the fire, turning it into alcohol. All these bizarre theories culminated in their meeting with Dr. Werner Spitz in the documentary, where Daniel and Jay just can't seem to accept his conclusions. Daniel and Jay were at some point, and possibly still are, wanting a second autopsy performed, because they don't believe the results from the initial autopsy despite multiple experts confirming them. They typically use Brian as an excuse, saying that they want him to know the truth about his mom when he grows up. as long as that truth doesn't involve Diane being ultimately at fault. There is also speculation that perhaps Danny and Diane got in a fight that morning at the campground, which caused Diane to have a mental breakdown or become suicidal. Danny doesn't give me the impression of being a very attentive husband, so if his wife was going through some serious shit, it's likely he wouldn't have noticed or cared enough to do anything about it. Or maybe he made the decision they would settle things when they got home, not expecting Diane would do anything crazy. Now let's get to some facts pushed about the case that I believe to be misinformation. Dominic Barbara says in the press conference, on the day in question, they were not getting divorced. They were not in marital counseling. They had no marital problems. She was not an alcoholic. She rarely had a drink. She got in the van with the children. 9 witnesses saw her that day not drunk. With no alcohol breath. No pot breath. And what should have taken a 35-minute drive took almost 4 hours. Prior to getting into that car, she had numerous medical conditions, problems. One of those was an abscess almost 2 months old which she would not go to the dentist for, no matter how much he begged her. There was the swelling, and there was pain on the left side. She had diabetes of various levels. She also had a lump on her leg, and the lump on the leg we're not sure what it was, but it was moving. We have not yet decided to have a new autopsy.
They were not getting divorced. They were not in marital counseling. They had no marital problems. She was not an alcoholic. She rarely had a drink. She got in the van with the children. 9 witnesses saw her that day not drunk, with no alcohol breath, no pot breath. And what should have taken a 35-minute drive took almost 4 hours. Prior to getting into that car, she had numerous medical conditions, problems. One of them was an abscess which was almost 2 months old, which she would not go to the dentist for no matter how much he begged her. There was a swelling and there was pain on the left side.
I believe it was, yes.
She had diabetes at various levels. Excuse me. And then, remember the rule. If you want a question, you raise your hand. If not, I'll never point to you. Okay? She also had a lump on her leg, and the lump on the leg, we're not sure what it was, but it was moving. We have not yet decided to have a new autopsy.
I think this press conference was likely the birth of the rumor that it should have taken her only 35 to 45 minutes to get home, which seems to be reported everywhere I have researched this case. However, I found this to be untrue. Say what you will about the mysterious moving lump on her leg or the diabetes of various levels, but Diane was making an approximately 2.5-hour trip, not counting stops, as the campground, which is located at 124 Hunter Lake Drive in Parksville, New York, to the Schuler's home address at 805 14th Street in West Babylon, New York, is a 2.5-hour drive. Emma told her dad that they were planning on getting home around 1 p.m., which after leaving at 9:30 a.m. would make it a 3.5-hour drive counting stopping for breakfast. Diane also stopped multiple times to get out of the car and vomit. There is no discrepancy in the timeline at all. It all makes perfect sense, and Diane was running a little bit late, but she wasn't expected to arrive home in just 35 minutes. Here are the estimates for the trip. From the campground to the McDonald's, it was 9 miles away, which is estimated to take approximately 16 minutes. Diane arrived at McDonald's in 26 minutes, which, considering they were getting ready to make a trip and she was dealing with 5 kids, it doesn't seem terribly out of the ordinary that it would take an extra 11 minutes to get there. So, they stay at the McDonald's for 37 minutes, which seems a perfectly normal amount of time to feed 5 kids. Then they leave McDonald's and go to the Sunoco gas station, which should take less than a minute to drive there. It takes Diane 13 minutes to get all the kids in the car and get on their seat belts and strap them into car seats and possibly to prepare her screwdriver drink, if that's what you believe, so that's totally reasonable as well. Next, she leaves the gas station, and her next stop is at the Ramapo service station, which should take about 59 minutes. Diane, driving like a bat out of hell, makes it in just 47 minutes, so she actually got there much quicker than expected. Her next stop was when she stopped at the Tappan Zee Bridge to call the Hanses. The ETA from the service station to the bridge is about 16 minutes. Diane makes it in 15. And finally, it should take about 11 minutes to get from the Tappan Zee Bridge to Pleasantville Road, which is where Diane turned onto the Taconic Parkway. It took Diane about 30 minutes to make it there. So we have about 20 minutes unaccounted for there, which was after Diane had left her phone and was likely spiraling out of control, so who knows what she was doing during that time. So when you look at the timeline and actually look up the distances between the locations she stopped at, it makes perfect sense, and there is no reason to question why she was driving around for so long. All the time frames add up and make sense. If you take all the stops she made and don't account for any time she spent at any locations, as if she had just driven straight to one place after another, it would have taken about an hour and 46 minutes. She still had a little over an hour's drive to make it the rest of the way home. Almost 2 weeks after the crash on August 6, 2009, Warren Hance spoke to the police and stated that around 9 a.m. on the day of the crash, he received a call from his daughter Emma, who stated that they would be home around 1 p.m. and that everyone had a great time that weekend. He then received a second call while he was at his office around 11:30 a.m. from Diane telling him that they would be home around 1:30 p.m. He said Diane sounded perfectly fine at this time. As stated, before Diane called Warren's home around 1 p.m. and spoke to his wife Jackie. Warren arrives home minutes later, and she told him Diane had called and sounded out of it, and she could hear kids crying in the background. Warren then called Diane and later reported that she sounded incoherent during this phone call. He had her put his daughter Emma on the phone. When Emma got on the phone, she sounded upset, and he asked her what signs she saw, and she told him that she saw signs for Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown. Warren then had Diane get back on the phone and told her to pull over and stay right there, and he would come and get her. He then went and picked up his father, Warren Hance Sr., so they could drive both vehicles back home. Warren told the police he had never heard of his sister using marijuana until he was informed of it by the police. At the conclusion of the investigation, it was found that the accident was caused by the actions of Diane Schuler, who drove the wrong way on Taconic Parkway and had a blood alcohol level of 0.19 and THC in her system as well. She alone is responsible for the accident. An investigation into Daniel Schuler failed to reveal that he had prior knowledge that Diane was intoxicated, and no criminal actions were brought against him. The Hanses went on to have another child, a daughter named Casey. That concludes the case of Diane Schuler. What can we take away from this? I think the most important thing learned from this case, whether it's true regarding this case or not, is that there are a lot of people in the world suffering from alcoholism, drug addiction, and mental health issues in silence. When there are problems with the brain or the mind, it's not as plainly visible as someone suffering from more physical ailments. Not all of them will seek or ask for help. Some don't understand what's happening to them, and some are afraid of the stigma or judgment surrounding whatever they're going through. I think the best thing we can do is to get this information out there and educate people and normalize seeking help for these problems. We go through the day commonly asking or being asked how we are doing, and let's be real, nobody actually cares how you're doing. Half the time the other person doesn't even stop to listen to your response, or if you're the one asking, they might treat it as a rhetorical question and not even respond. Not that you care anyway. And it's not like if you do stop to listen the other person is going to be honest about how they're really doing. They're just going to say what everyone always says. I'm doing great. How about you? Because it's just formalities. You're not really interested in how they're doing, and they're not interested in telling you how they're doing. Unfortunately, that can lead to a society where there are lots of people silently suffering and don't feel like they have anyone they can turn to. If someone is in a state where they're thinking about ending their life, what can they really do? If they tell people, it just looks like they're seeking attention. If they don't tell people, then they don't get help. I don't know what the answer is. All I can do is try to be there for people when they do open up to me. And when I ask people how they're doing, to really listen and care, and if something seems off, then question it. It may seem impolite at times, but maybe it could save that person. I don't know what Diane Schuler was going through, but that's what I take away from this type of case. Thank you all for listening to my video about the tragic case of Diane Schuler. Sorry it took so long for me to make another true crime video after my last one on Michelle Missy Avila. I have some mental health issues myself, and it's not always that easy for me to get motivated to do things like this. However, I believe I will become more active and post videos more frequently in the future, and hopefully I will continue getting better at it. Please like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe, and most importantly, let's get a good discussion going in the comments. What do you think really happened to Diane? If there are any experts out there that can explain some of the things I went over in the video, please feel free to do so. With that, I conclude the case of Diane Schuler.